There are 7 operators in Rainbow Six Siege that I have chosen to represent the 7 deadly sins: sloth, pride, envy, wrath, gluttony, lust, and greed. Let's start off with the easiest sin to fall into, which is sloth. Sloth is defined as a reluctance to work or make an effort, also known as laziness. The operator I've chosen to represent this sin is Echo. Echo players are about as lazy as it gets, and if you want proof of that, just listen to some of Echo's voice lines. Echo's entire in-game character is completely built around Echo being lazy and just letting his drones quite literally do all of the work. The raw definition of sloth. Not only is Echo sloth-worthy in his lore, but in the gameplay, actual Echo players are super lazy a lot of the times because they'll just sit on their cameras the entire round, stunning people so their teammates can get kills. That's not a terrible idea, but the only issue with this is that it's an extra gun that's not on the board that's not being used because you're just on your cameras too much. You're essentially putting your teammates in a 4v5 instead of just killing players outright with your weapon and making it a 5v5 and just getting on your cameras when you need to. There is a time and place to get on your Echo cameras, but I see a lot of Echo players completely across the map on their Echo cam the entire round because they want to get that really flashy play of being able to stun people off the diffuser. I mean, if Echo's kit is completely catered toward just being lazy, who else would fit this sin other than him? The entire point of Echo is literally just to sit on cameras because it's like Echo said, efficiency is clever laziness. One thing about Echo players, they actually do know that they're lazy a lot of the times. That's just the playstyle that they like to have. They don't like to be all flashy like Warden players or going into gunfights like Ashe players. They just like to kind of do their thing. And they at least admit that they're slothful, which is not at all the case for the next sin, the sin of pride. Pride is defined as believing that one is essentially better than others, failing to acknowledge the accomplishments of others, or excessive admiration of the personal self. The operator who best matches this description of pride is Ashe. If there's one operator I could pick that people have the highest ego on, it is Ashe players, by far. I think if you played the game for more than 100 hours, you probably already know this. Ashe has 2 very good guns, the R4C or the G36C. One of them has a bit more recoil but with a higher kick, and the other one is a bit easier to control if you want to go for more headshots. They both also have ACOGs on them, and she's a 3-speed, making it to where if anyone wants to just run and gun like they're in Call of Duty, they can do so and do it naturally. This is just going to attract players who have high egos because people with high egos like to swing everything and take gunfights because they think that they are the best aimer in the entire lobby. Now, even if that were the case, it's best suited on Ashe because she has weapons and the speed to be able to make the playstyle viable. She also just has an Ashe charge, which makes it easier for you to rush because you can Ashe charge into soft walls, barricades, whatever it may be. So not only does her utility make it easier for egotistical players to play her, it's almost a perfect fit that people who play Ashe are naturally just prideful, which is why I think making Ashe the sin of pride a perfect fit. But the rabbit hole on why this operator is the sin of pride goes even further and even more into the past. You see, a few years back when Bolo started playing the game in his younger days, the game was getting at its most popular. This is back before they nerfed quick leaning and movement, so you could lean faster, you could lean farther on your screen, and you could move even more. This was an even more powerful tool for you to utilize when you got kills. And they also hadn't nerfed R4C recoil at that time, so rushing was even better on Ashe back then than it was now. With Bolo on the rise showing people that you can run and actually play this game at a fast-paced way like you're playing Call of Duty, the rushing on Ashe specifically on this operator was just more popular because people saw Bolo rushing on Ashe specifically. He wasn't running in with IQ, he wasn't running in with Capitao, he wasn't even rushing in with Maverick because he wasn't even out yet. He wasn't rushing in with any other 3-speed, it was specifically Ashe. So not only was Ashe's utility and guns really good at showing people that you can rush on this operator, but it was already popular because of a content creator, and an entire wave of players that are already rushing on Ashe became even more prideful. These types of players though typically suffer from a second sin if they're losing in their Ashe rush, and that is the next sin, the sin of wrath. Wrath can be defined as rage, specifically an inordinate and uncontrollable feeling of hatred and anger towards others. The operator who best fits the description is Clash. Now, when I was thinking of making this video, and I was looking through all of the operators in the game right now, I was going to an operator for wrath specifically that I thought people would use when they were angry or when they were crashing out after losing a few rounds or if they were just trying to throw the game, and it was between Amaru and Clash, but I definitely feel like Clash is the most rageful operator that somebody can play. Clash as an operator is pretty rageful. I mean, let's not even take the playstyle or the operator into account. Have you heard this operator's voice lines?
A little help here! Caught a live one! Asshole! Any last words? Gotcha, you twat! C4 detonated! Check this one!
she's a pretty angry operator. Like, you get the idea. And I think being able to use those voice lines against people and have them hear it whenever you're using Clash is just so satisfying. Like, if I've lost a few rounds and I play Clash, being able to curse at people as I'm shocking them just makes me feel better on the inside. There's nothing like taking out your wrath on somebody with an operator that you know is going to make them mad. If you had to pick one operator to make somebody else mad on the enemy team, Clash is definitely one of those operators. So not only are you making everybody else mad, but you yourself are probably picking it out of anger, and I think that's why Clash perfectly embodies the sin of wrath, not only because of her playstyle, but also because of her voice lines. I think right now shields are still pretty strong even after the shield nerf, so having an operator that can counter shields, especially out of anger, definitely suits Clash the best. Even if Blackbeard is banned or Blitz is banned, you still have Monty, or you still have Osa, or you still have Fuse Shield, God forbid if you use that. And a lot of people have just resorted angrily playing Clash, which is why I think and I know that Clash as an operator is the perfect representation through the player base of the sin of wrath. Somebody that actually represents their sin a lot better though is the sin of envy. The sin of envy is defined as a desire to have a quality, possession, or desirable attribute belonging to somebody else. The candidate I chose to represent this sin is Warden. Now when you think of Warden players, you think of the same type of people as Ashe players. People who like to just run and gun, but Warden players specifically are a bit different because Warden wasn't really popular until one Siege creator made it popular, and that is Spoit. If we rewind all the way back to the 1.5 times scope meta, this is where if an operator had a 1.5 times scope, they were hard meta. This is actually back when Orc was one of the best roamers in the game purely because he had a scope. This is how powerful this scope was, and one of the operators that had the scope in question was Warden. Now people weren't really playing Warden because if you had to choose a 1.5 on a gun between Warden and Oryx or Mozzie, you're never going to pick Warden because his utility sucks. But there was one content creator that picked up Warden and made people realize the potential of having a low recoil SMG with a 1.5 times scope, and that content creator is Spoit. Most of you know by now who Spoit is because he's become increasingly popular throughout this past year through doing content collabs with jynxzi, with Clicks, with a bunch of famous Twitch streamers. You get the idea. This man is popular. And out of any content creator that I could think of, Spoit specifically made Warden 1.5 times scope very, very popular. And the reason that I think that Warden represents the sin of envy is because every single person that got inspired by Spoit to play Warden just played Warden because they wanted to be like Spoit. And if you look at the definition of envy, it's wanting either the possession of somebody else or the quality of somebody else. And the majority of time that I saw Warden players playing Warden, especially during the 1.5 times scope meta, was because they wanted the quality of the aim that Spoit had. They were envious. It wasn't necessarily like an angry jealousy, like I hate Spoit and I'm better than him, so I'm gonna play Warden and post clips on TikTok. That's not really what it was. But people weren't really religiously playing Warden when he wasn't the most picked defender until Spoit made it really popular in his YouTube videos to use Warden 1.5. Now, I'm not gonna pretend that Spoit is the only person that played it and he himself single-handedly made it popular, but what I will say is nobody played Warden until the 1.5 times scope came out. Even when it did, most people were playing Mozzie or Oryx, and I only really saw Warden 1.5 times scope being used once Spoit started using it and streaming it and becoming very popular. Then, the season after he had his big break in content creation, everyone started using it. Maybe it wasn't really just him that made it popular, but he definitely contributed to it in large. And now every time I see a Warden player, even without the 1.5 times scope, that just runs around and tries to get a bunch of kills, it's because they're envious of the aim of other people that they watch, and they want to try to replicate it. Content creators like Spoit, Uzi, Bolo, even Stompin that uses SMG-12, or any other really good aiming content creator that used Warden back in the 1.5 meta, or even that uses Warden now, have inspired a lot of people to play Warden even if it's not for his utility, which is why I think Warden is the perfect representation of the sin of envy. Now, you might not have seen that one coming, but I guarantee you are not going to see the next sin coming, which is the sin of lust. Lust can be defined as an over-obsession and overvalue over an object or an idea, often referred to in a sexual manner. The candidate I've chosen for the sin of lust is Iana. Now, it's no secret that video games in general, especially Siege, have some fan service in them, especially Iana. Iana with her elite skin is somebody that people simp over a lot. As somebody with a lot of hours in Siege, I see it almost every single day. You have clips on TikTok of people like looking up her skirt. You have people making like tier lists about like who's the hottest one, and people always put her in S tier. Like, you get the idea. People lust over Iana a lot, and that's half of the reason that some people play her, especially if they have that elite skin. Another great example of this is that when Iana was released, she had a certain pose that she showed off, a part of her body that, you know, I can't really say on YouTube, but you get the idea. People were actually lusting over it so bad that Ubisoft had to actually take out out that pose in favor of the new pose that we see, where now Iana just sits facing the camera. So as a content creator who plays the game, the number one operator that I find people lust over the most is Iana. With the second place to maybe Ella, but that was more back in the day before Iana came out. And again, it's no secret that the Siege community likes some of the Siege women in the game. Gamers will be gamers, it is what it is. Now that one might have been obvious to you, but this next one should be pretty obvious to you as well. And that is the operator I'll be going over for the sin of gluttony. Gluttony is defined as an overindulgence and overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. The operator that best fits this description is not Gridlock, actually, it's funny enough, Fuse. Now if we were to talk about lore-wise and actual size-wise who was the biggest glutton, obviously it would be Mrs. Gridlock, but gameplay-wise, I think people who have a problem with gluttony that would play the game would probably be playing Fuse. Especially in lower elo, the only reason that people actually pick Fuse is because they want to get kills with the gadget. They'll use all 4 Fuse cluster charges above the site just so that they can get a single kill instead of just using their gun or using a better operator. Pretty commonly just putting cluster charges above where they think players will be because they like the idea of just having the thing in the top right of their screen that says that they got a kill. And that's literally it. They're just a glutton over the fact that they like to get kills with their gadget. They could do it on Capcan, they could do it on any other gadget that has an explosive damage, but they all choose to do it on Fuse because it's the most satisfying operator to get gadget kills with. The true nature of a glutton. Not only this, but Fuse is also a shield. And that is why I think Fuse is the perfect idealistic representation of the sin of gluttony. A lot of you might not agree with that take, but a take that I guarantee you'll be much more happy to agree with is the sin of greed. Greed is defined as the excessive desire for anything, especially in terms of wealth. The operator who best matches this description of greed is Doc. Now, how are Doc players greedy? Well, if you've played the game, you probably already know playing with a Doc player and begging for heals is something that happens a lot, especially when you know for a fact they have all 3 of their stims up, because a lot of Doc players are so greedy that they'll just take all of the stims for themselves. They don't really share their stims because they don't really believe in their teammates because they have high egos. The Doc players, just to mention, are also the same type of people that play Ashe. So like I said, they're pretty prideful, but their biggest sin isn't pride. Their biggest sin is that they're so greedy that they never actually stim their teammates and they only stim themselves because they believe that they are the only ones that can win the gunfights on the map. This is further shown through the loadout that you have. An ACOG on a low recoil SMG. People love to play these sorts of guns, are usually people who really believe that they're the only people that can get kills on their team. So they force themselves to play the ACOG. It's very, very rare you will go into a ranked game and have a Doc that will actually stim you, even if you beg for it, even if you knife in front of their faces to try to get their attention, even if you ask politely, these Doc players will not stim you. It is the only operator that I can think of out of all of the operators in Rainbow Six Siege, which is over 70 by the way, that the player base consistently uses an ability and doesn't share it with their team because they're so greedy. These players also typically will not set up site. They'll take their barbed wire and they'll put it next to where they're playing because they want it for themselves because they're greedy. And they also typically like to spawn peek with the ACOG that I talked about earlier because they're not going to set up site because they need to get their KD up because they're greedy for kills. They're just greedy people, which is why Doc as an operator, as people play him, is the biggest representation of greed in Rainbow Six Siege. But with it out of the way, that's it for today's video. Check out this next video and I'll see you there.